Imagine this. You're presenting and all eyes are on you. But a few sentences in, something feels off. You hesitate, you lose your place. Then a question comes. You try to answer, but you can't. Later, people start talking. They say you weren't well prepared, that you're not very disciplined, and that you're not taking it seriously. Now, look at the same moment from your side. You hadn't slept all week because of the renovation at home. You were exhausted and you had a pounding headache. Afterwards, you tell yourself, this isn't like me. I'm usually much better than this. If things had been different, this would have gone well. A week later, someone else stands in that same spot. Just like you did. He struggles. Another unsuccessful presentation. But this time, you don't think about his exhaustion, his lack of sleep, or the headache he might have had. You think he's not very disciplined. He's not taking it seriously. Same failure, different judgment. Why is the same failure explained so differently? Failure is often understood as an unsuccessful attempt to achieve a goal. But it rarely stays simple. It can introduce uncertainty, disrupt continuity, and it raises a question: why did this happen? What happens is often not left as it is. It's quietly connected to a reason, shaped into something that makes sense. The explanation doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to hold the experience together. Failure not only leaves the outcome unclear, it also leads us to consider what the outcome might imply about the person or the situation, and an explanation begins to take shape. But the explanations that emerge are not simply neutral reflections of what happened. They often follow recurring patterns in how causes are assigned. So, how does the mind explain failure, and why does it do so in different ways? One of the concepts we can consider in exploring these questions is the fundamental attribution error. It refers to a tendency to overemphasize internal factors such as personality or ability when explaining other people's behavior, while giving less attention to the situation they are in. When others fail, the outcome may quickly be seen as a reflection of who they are. The explanation often moves toward conclusions about competence or character, while elements like pressure, timing, or constraints tend to receive less attention. The result is an explanation that feels clear and coherent, but may leave out important parts of the situation. This can show up in simple, everyday moments like this. Someone misses a deadline for a project. It's easy to think she's careless or not responsible enough. What we don't see are the conditions around it. Technical issues that slow things down, last-minute meetings that kept interrupting, and a schedule that was already under pressure. A similar pattern appears when we shift perspective. The actor-observer bias describes how explanations can shift depending on whether one is directly involved in the event or observing it from the outside. When people are directly involved, the situation often becomes more prominent. When they observe someone else, attention tends to shift toward the person. As actors, people are immersed in what is happening around them. Their attention is drawn to circumstances, constraints, and everything unfolding in the moment. The situation can become more noticeable. As observers, attention shifts toward the person performing the action, while the surrounding context fades into the background. What stands out can begin to influence the explanation. This becomes especially visible when failure is involved. When others fail, it may be seen as a reflection of more stable personal traits. When the same outcome is experienced personally, it is more likely to be explained in terms of situational or temporary factors. For example, you are on your way to an important meeting, moving through a crowded city. The traffic is barely moving. You arrive late, thinking it was the traffic. There was nothing you could have done. And yet, someone else is late too. This time, it feels different. It feels like he just didn't plan well or didn't take it seriously enough. This asymmetry can also be shaped by motivational influences. A related pattern is often described as the self-serving bias. It can be understood as a tendency to interpret outcomes in ways that preserve a more favorable view of oneself. In that sense, the explanation may also serve a protective function, helping maintain a sense of self that remains intact. Successes are more likely to be linked to internal factors such as ability or effort, while failures are more often explained through external or unstable factors such as luck or circumstances. Explanations are not based only on what seems accurate. They can also be shaped by what feels acceptable. When failure threatens one's sense of competence, the explanation may shift in ways that reduce that threat. This does not necessarily involve deliberate distortion. It can reflect a tendency to interpret events in ways that remain psychologically sustainable. Imagine this. A student checks the exam results. If she passes, she thinks, "I really studied for this." If she fails, she thinks the questions weren't fair. The way a failure is explained can also affect how it is experienced. When it is seen as something internal, stable, and difficult to change, such as a lack of ability, it may be associated with feelings like shame or helplessness and can lower expectations for what comes next. When it is linked to something internal but more changeable, such as effort, it may bring a sense of responsibility, but also the possibility of doing better. Explanations based on external factors like luck may reduce personal responsibility, but can also weaken the sense of control over future outcomes. While explanations focus on why something happened, a broader perspective looks at how meaning itself is formed. From this view, meaning is not simply found in events, but often constructed after the fact. Events are rarely experienced as fully formed units of meaning. Instead, people tend to select certain details, organize them into a coherent structure, and embed them within a narrative. Failure tends to stand out in this kind of process because it disrupts expectations and calls for reinterpretation. Without an explanation, the event can remain unclear and difficult to make sense of. Through this process, often described as sensemaking, failure may begin to take on meaning, becoming something that can be understood within a broader sense of how events unfold. But meaning does not seem to be shaped by understanding alone. It may also be influenced by the need to maintain a stable sense of self. When failure seems to threaten that sense of self, it can create a form of tension. One way this tension may be managed is through how the explanation is formed. Explanations that point to something fundamentally wrong can be harder to accept, while those tied to situation can feel easier to hold. Taken together, these patterns suggest that explanations of failure are driven by multiple interacting processes. There is an effort to reduce uncertainty. Perspective influences what is noticed and what becomes part of the explanation. Motivational factors shape what feels acceptable, and this broader process organizes these elements into a coherent narrative. This helps explain why failure often seems to require a story. Without an explanation, the experience can feel incomplete and difficult to process. A story provides structure, linking what happened to possible causes and placing it within a broader context. At the same time, the story is rarely the same for everyone. It can depend on where one stands in relation to the event, what draws attention, and what needs to be preserved at the level of identity. The story that emerges is shaped not only by what happened, but by how it is seen and what is left out. So, when we try to make sense of what happened, what do we tend to focus on and what gets left out?